Okay, perfect. Thanks everyone for joining us today. I'm going to go ahead and share my presentation. Give me a wave if you can't see it for any reason. All right, so I'm here today to talk about challenging academic incivility. The long and short of this, kind of the facetious subtitle in my brain is what to do when your student's a jerk. But this is kind of beyond that, just having those occasional students who are challenging, and it can run the gamut of kind of minor inconveniences and behavioral issues in class to more disruptive behavior. Kind of want to talk about the scope of that. So yeah, that's what we'll go ahead and dive into. And can I ask, can everyone hear me okay? Is this loud enough? Yep. Okay, wonderful. So getting started, thank you for joining me today. I'm Michelle Iwin, Associate Director for Graduate Programs here at CCAPS. I work with all of our graduate programs, our graduate faculty, as well as our directors of graduate studies. And I believe there are a couple of folks who are joining us from undergrad. So I just wanted to say welcome. I hope you find some useful information, and most of the strategies that I will suggest at the end of the presentation are applicable to both undergrad and grad students. So feel free to pull things and put them in your toolbox for when you're teaching. I also wanted to say that please feel free as we go through the presentation. I've built time in at the end to just have a conversation so we can crowdsource ideas and strategies because I know a lot of us have developed lots of toolkit items over the years. So we have opportunities to talk at the end, but also feel free to just pop on video or chat throughout the presentation, and we can have as that conversation as you like. So we will go ahead and get started. So what is academic incivility? So this definition is from the University of Minnesota Dignity Project Work Group. So that is an initiative that was developed by the graduate school in concert with faculty members who are working to both professionalize and better the relationships of research graduate students as well as their thesis or dissertation advisor. Those relationships can be really powerful and set a student up for lifelong success. They can also be occasionally toxic. So this is an initiative to kind of get everybody off on the same foot and have the building blocks for a really positive experience. So the Dignity Project defines academic incivility as a behavior that creates an offensive, intimidating, or hostile learning or work environment. This is important not just because to experience academic incivility as the instructor is annoying and frustrating, but it also disrupts the learning environment for students in the classroom. It just destabilizes the classroom as a safe space for having those challenging conversations, which is why we're all here to grow and learn. It can feel individually threatening or emotionally draining if you experience it, and it interrupts our equilibrium when we're teaching. So academic incivility can be experienced in any direction. So it can be faculty to student. That's what we kind of talked about briefly with the Dignity Project. It can be student to student. This happens a fair amount. It can also be student to faculty, and that is what we're talking about for the most part today. So it may be unrelated to power dynamics within the classroom. So you as the instructor have a position of power within the classroom. That doesn't necessarily mean that you won't be interrogated or experience this incivility. So it can be unrelated to those kind of traditional notions of power dynamics. I do want to acknowledge that incivility from students is much more likely to be experienced by instructors who have marginalized identities. I'm sure we've all read the studies, for example, that talk about women, or especially women of color, when they receive their student evaluations of teaching. They have a lot more comments about their appearance than their actual teaching. So it's those dynamics can be at play in these instances. And I feel like for those of us who have experienced academic incivility, we may realize that it definitely can be impacted by the identity that we walk through the world with. So as the provost and president's offices have shared a number of resources in the recent past for students navigating incivility, I want to talk about the incivility between student and instructor and how this impacts the larger classroom setting, because it's not just a two-way street, it impacts the entire classroom. So I hope you never have to experience it from one of your students, but I hope this gives you a few tools to be prepared and empowered with some solutions should it occur. So academic incivility kind of clusters around three major areas, and most of this information is from Courtney Wright's Framing Classroom Incivility. I should call attention to the fact that when we share the presentation out, and I believe if you click the link in Canvas, you can see all of the links and access them, and those are both my citations, but also resources for additional information. So I encourage you to, if you find any of this useful, click around and kind of expand your information that way. So Courtney Wright defines these kind of three focus areas as classroom or Canvas behavior. So this can be sustained and excessive communications, either after or outside of class. This could be a student who stays after class every single time and wants to talk about everything and kind of takes space and time away from other students. This can also be a barrage of emails that you may receive after class or on the weekends. This can also be disrupting the flow of class with unrelated or unnecessarily confrontational questions or statements. This is when students just seem to really dig in on an idea and can't kind of let go and go with the flow of the class. So those are kind of challenging moments. This can also be just rude or disrespectful communication, as well as microaggressions, both intentional and unintentional. The classroom and Canvas behavior can also be as simple as just kind of being a little rude and maybe a little oblivious. So this could be students who are having side conversations, students who are sleeping in class, students who frequently join class late or answer calls or texts in the middle of class. So I think those in particular behaviors are growing every year. And especially when we have Zoom classrooms, it can be a little challenging if you know a student is looking at their device right here to know that you have their sustained attention. And it's also disrespectful for other students in the class. The next major area, and I think this one in particular we see a lot, is grades. So just general anxiety around grades. So this could be harassment over a particular course assignment. And the grade that they received, and it doesn't matter the points value, truly. I've seen students who maybe lose 2 points over a very small assignment within the larger course of, within the larger scheme of their course, and are very, very upset about it, as well as students who receive, who earn a lower grade than they expect in the course and believe that they should be offered a higher grade. This can also be hostility around plagiarism. So it can be, if you as an instructor identify that a student committed intentional or unintentional plagiarism, and you either address it and ask them to revise, or you have a more formal sanction with the Office for Community Standards, students can react in very particular ways around this. And the reason is that grades are particularly sensitive for many students because of their identity. It can be the grade that they think they should earn can be wrapped up in who they think they are. So if a student who typically thinks that they should be getting A's and has gotten A's in the past and gets a B, they may have very well earned the B, but it doesn't mean that it's still not difficult for them to adjust who they think they are as a student. Grades can also be tied to students' beliefs about their future. So this could be whether their likelihood of being accepted into a terminal degree, so PhD, PsyD, medical school, dental school, anything like that will be directly impacted by getting an A- versus an A. So I think students sometimes lose a little bit of the, or can't see the forest for the trees in those moments without realizing that applications are reviewed holistically. It's not just the one grade that may make or break your application. So I think, grades are a really sensitive and touchy subject, and we will talk a little bit more about that further in the presentation. And finally, course content, especially at the grad level, can be an area of conflict. So this could be refusing to participate in assignments or in classroom activities. So this means a student either fundamentally disagrees with the worldview that is presented with the activity, thinks that they may have more experience or knowledge than the instructor in that particular activity or professional life. So both of those can be either indirect or direct conflict, as well as and this doesn't happen that often, thankfully, but it does happen on occasion, students who may directly undermine your expertise as a faculty member. So this could be questioning your credentials, your experience, your number of years in the field, or the way that you approach particular things within the field at large. So I do want to call attention to the fact that graduate students can and should sometimes question the premise and argument of course texts. So that helps them stretch their knowledge of sound scholarly research and reputable primary literature. So that is not a direct attack on you in most cases. That is simply them being curious, intellectually stimulated graduate students and wanting to know the larger scope of the field. So that's a very different instance than when they are directly challenging your credibility as an instructor. So just a little bit of a caveat there. So I'm going to attempt to do a Zoom poll now. Let's see. Launch. All right, can you see the poll? Okay, yeah. So just two simple questions. Question one, can you share if you've had any experience with academic, or if you've experienced academic incivility? And using these three kind of general areas, which of them did it take? And question two, what resources would you have liked during this incident? So this be sample language to confront the moment, some opportunities or tips to make it a teachable moment, tips for having a private conversation with a student after the fact, or contacts and next steps for escalating an incident. All right, I will give us maybe another 5 seconds and then see what everyone's coming up with. All right. So I just ended the poll. Let me share the results. So it looks like a majority of people have experienced, not surprised, academic incivility around grades, as well as classroom and Canvas behavior, and less so around course content. I'm happy about that because I feel like experiencing the academic incivility around course content is honestly one of the most challenging things to address. But I think grades and just that kind of interpersonal behavior can be a little bit easier to address. So that's fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. And it looks like the majority of people are interested in sample language to confront this in the moment, as well as tips to make a teachable moment. Tips on having private conversations and contacts. Wonderful. Okay, so thank you for that. We'll touch on a little bit of most of those, but I also appreciate your feedback because this gives me fodder for additional handouts that we can create or little mini presentations. So I appreciate you. All right, so why are students acting this way? And I'm not sure about you as an instructor, but I have experienced in the last few years what seems to be increasing incidents of academic incivility in class. And I sometimes wonder, is it just me? Is the world changing around me? Are students changing? And the answer is yes, to all of it and to some of it. So again, Courtney Wright notes a number of factors may influence incivility from students. And again, we talked about grades a bit, so grades can be tied to personal identities. Course content may uncomfortably challenge a student's worldview, and this particularly happens in the humanities and social sciences, less so in some of the traditional hard sciences. This can also be a reactivity to a prior incident in class or on campus. So a student may be bringing in something that they experienced outside of your class and bringing it to class, and it just sort of bubbles up from there. So that it can be any number of these kind of increasing pressures. So there are a few internal variables, things that students can control, as well as some external variables that students cannot control that can also impact these kind of flare-up moments in class. So the internal variables is a general sense of education as a commodity. And I feel like from the literature that I've been reading, it seems like this has been growing ever more frequent from about the 90s on. Students view an education as a consumer product, so a commodity. This growing sense of consumerism and academic entitlement means that some students, and again, it's not that many, but I feel like when you encounter it, you really notice it. They have the understanding that because they pay tuition, they are owed a particular degree or owed essentially the diploma. So again, these are things that are much more difficult to confront, not impossible, but just a little bit more challenging than some of the other things. So with these internal variables, a Greenberger study in 2008 showed that 66% of students believe that trying hard, I'm going to use air quotes around that, should net them a good grade. 40% believe that rating a majority of required texts for a course should equal a B grade, not necessarily finishing all of the assignments or the readings. And about a quarter of them think that a professor should reply to an email the same day, which just makes me laugh because we are all busy and have lots of other students as well. So just different expectations for students who view education as this particular commodity. There are also external variables that, again, students can't control these, but they weigh heavily upon the way a student may, the preparation that they come to class with. So this could be food or housing insecurity, mental health or substance use struggles, as well as job loss and underemployment or overemployment if they're taking care of family. So those three bullets have been absolutely exacerbated by the pandemic. And I think that's something that we have heard, especially in the first presentation earlier today, all of the additional stress that students are under. So it's no wonder that these kind of moments are flaring up a bit more. And I included this link to the academic incivility and the graduate professional student experience survey. This is a survey that the university did last year. So it's, I don't want to go into it too much, but I think it's a very useful snapshot into the things that students are experiencing on a day-to-day basis at the graduate student level, as well as professional students. So that's what we as CCAPS fall under. So I encourage you to take a look at that when you have some free time. Okay, so breaking up this challenging academic incivility or interrupting academic incivility, I broke it up into before an incident, during an incident, and after an incident, or when you need to escalate it. So these are just a few things to keep in mind, and I urge you to use any of these ideas as tools for your toolbox. Some of them are applicable to some situations, some of them may not be, so use what works for you. So we can kind of go through that. So first, lots of literature says that we should be establishing ground rules for discussion or behavior policy. And policy is a very strong word, but essentially this is behavior expectations is another way to say it, that are noted in the syllabus and then reinforced in class. Importantly, you can put it in the syllabus, but if you don't model it on the first day and on the next class and on the next class, it becomes pretty useless. So it's one of those things that you really have to commit to if you're going to use it, but I think it can be a really helpful way to set out expectations and embody them throughout the experience. So these kind of behavior guidelines, policy, whatever you want to call it, could take the form of an inclusion and diversity statement if you wanted to go that route. And that is something that a few of us have been toying with a template version that is absolutely optional that we hope to get out in the next few weeks for those of you who might be interested in adopting it. This could also be a co-created classroom behavior guideline or behavior contract. This could be as formal as something that you have students handwrite and sign, that they develop themselves as this is the appropriate behavior within our classroom space, within our learning space. It could be just an online signature. It can be as fancy or as simple as you want it to be, as formal or informal. But the important part of this is that it's co-created. So this co-creation of a behavioral contract can help exert positive peer pressure. So the students help the other students adhere to this particular behavior. So I think that's a really useful thing to think about, especially based on the particular class and course content that you're teaching. So it may be more applicable for some courses than others, but again, nice tool to have in your toolbox. And importantly, know what the student conduct code is. So every syllabus in CCAPS has the student conduct code and a link to it in the policy statement section. So students are seeing it all the time. Whether they actually know it or read it is another question. So I think this is an opportunity for you to, on the first day or first session, just take a moment and have students either read the conduct code, read it together, but somehow help them put eyes on it and acknowledge that it is a set of behavior that they are expected to adhere to and that you as the instructor are expected to adhere to as well. So it's that reciprocal relationship building. Next, and again, I know this is content that we've heard a lot, and I think it's really useful in a lot of different settings, but building an early or mid-course informal feedback can be really, really helpful. So this allows you to pivot based on learners' needs. So if you're halfway through or a quarter of the way through your course, an informal anonymous survey that takes 2 minutes for students to fill out can give you a really wonderful opportunity to take their feedback and then change based on their learning needs. So if you need to spend more time on a particular thing, this is good both in a pedagogical sense, but I think this is also good in kind of a behavioral modeling sense. So this allows you to identify a potential future hot moment, which we'll talk about in just a moment, or an area of likely conflict. But the important part of this is that you're asking students to do something. So you also need to report back to them on the results of this. And it can be very general feedback. It doesn't need to be everything. But I think taking the time shows them that you value their perspective as individuals and that you are willing to at least consider certain modifications to the course, whether you enact them or not. That is up to you. But I think it's a nice moment to just take a breath when you're teaching. So if you're interested in this, I would urge you, if you're teaching a fully online course, to talk to your instructional designer, or if you're teaching a hybrid or face-to-face course, or if you're comfortable putting it in yourself, Adam Reef can help you build this or publish it. So if you're teaching online, go with your ID. If you're teaching hybrid face-to-face, go with Adam. So another opportunity to kind of build in these supports before an instant of academic incivility is to plan ahead to identify and diffuse hot moments. So a hot moment is the sudden eruption of tension and conflict in the classroom discussion. This can be in person, this can be a discussion question, this could be a video, it could be any form of conversation. So this is often this moment of tension is often via a student's unintentionally offensive comment, which may or may not be a microaggression. So I don't want to necessarily separate the two as to two distinct things. They can quite often be conflated. So you can't predict all of these moments, and sometimes you will necessarily have to encounter and want to encounter these because of your course content, or it is simply the conversation that you need to have at that moment in time with the students, as they walk through the world. But I think planning ahead to see if you can identify where these flashpoints maybe can be really helpful. It gives you the time to think about your strategies. So the two links in here are two different handouts, but I especially encourage you to check out the University of Michigan's Hot Moments handout. It has a ton of really helpful tips, tricks that you, again, choose what works for you and put it in your toolbox. So a few sample tips from the University of Michigan handout can include counting to 10 before deciding to address a particular instance with a class at that time. So you could do it right then, but take a breath and just be intentional about your choice to do that rather than reactive. You can choose to address it as a small group after class or with an individual in a separate meeting. So I think just taking a breath can give you a little bit of a space that you need to make the best decision in that moment. Also knowing your own biases or trigger points and consider how these might be influencing your perspective on the issue, as well as seeking to clarify student comment. So sometimes students say things, I think, either off the cuff or in a discussion post. Again, this can edge into microaggression territory, but without thinking through the full kind of scope of what they're saying. So seeking to clarify the student comment allows the student the opportunity to expand on their position or sit with the tension that they created. So I think it can work both ways depending on how you want it to work. Again, this could be one of those teachable moments when you actually let the student sit and the class sit with the discomfort of that particular comment. And I think often in grad programs, students will also kind of self-regulate and regulate the classroom as a group. So these particular moments may not actually be a moment that you need to address after you take that breath. I'm always pleasantly surprised by the way that other students will step up and try and help course correct their co-learners. So positive things can come from that. You also can choose to depersonalize the comment, but I think this is one of those things that you have to acknowledge that it may exacerbate the harm that a student who experienced a microaggression may feel. So that is a choice and you can make it, but I think it's taking that breath and weighing those options for yourself when you're in the moment. So again, University of Michigan handout, I really recommend it. I think it's very helpful. So when you're in the moment, how do you challenge academic incivility? So as hard as it can be sometimes, I think showing respect, interest, and warmth can be the most useful thing. So in a 2006 study, faculty were polled on the methods that they used to address academic incivility and how effective they were both on inattentive and directly hostile conflict. So by far the most used and the most effective method that these faculty members cited to interrupt or diffuse a moment of academic incivility was just the basic moment of communicating respect, interest, and warmth to a student. And I think that, again, is much easier when a student is making a good faith effort to learn and to grow. It can be challenging when you have a student who has some of those very particular behavior issues that may be just basically disrespectful to the classroom and their co-learners. So again, I would say use this when you can. It's a wonderful first approach, and then you can gradually escalate from there. And I should mention that this was also the most effective strategy for both inattentive. So again, that's that looking at your phone or doing something else in class and not paying attention versus directly hostile conflict between the student and you. So again, I think useful to put in your toolbox. And also, I think this gives you the opportunity, again, I think taking that breath, but assessing if the incivility is intentional to you or if it's situational. Excuse me. So does this mean, so for instance, is this an aggressive questioning of your authority as an instructor? Why are you the expert on this? Why are you teaching this course? Something to that nature. Or is this a student becoming really antsy prior to the end of class? So maybe distracted, fidgety, disconnected, staring at their phone. So I feel like one is much easier to address than the other. One is a direct conflict between you and it's that course content issue. The other one is more of a classroom behavior issue. And it might be as simple as thinking about, can I build in a bathroom break? Can I build in a stretch break? So I think there are those opportunities to figure out how the student or what particular type of incivility you're experiencing. And is it something that can be easily addressed versus is it something that needs a deeper dive? And I should also call out that when you're addressing these, I think sometimes, especially in the weird ambiguous state that we're in with COVID and having in-person and sometimes Zoom classes, a Zoom meeting can be a really good way to have both a bit of emotional distance during these confrontational or potentially confrontational meetings, but still give you the ability to read body language. So if you're having a private meeting or a private Zoom meeting with a student, I think requesting a camera on, even if they want to have a fake background like I do, it gives you the opportunity to kind of read what they're putting out. So the moment happened in class. So now you have to address it. And I say have to because in the 2006 study that we're referred to in the previous slide, one option is to ignore it. You can ignore academic incivility that you experience or that other students are experiencing in class. Generally, it's incredibly ineffective and makes for a bad experience for students. So I don't recommend you do that. Again, I think it's you need to decide in the moment for you, for the situation, for the student, what the best way to handle it is. But ignoring it or ignoring it frequently is not generally an effective way of addressing it or making a good learning environment for students. So first, deciding how you're going to address the behavior. So is this exactly at the time of the incident or is it shortly after, perhaps at the end of class? This could be the form of a verbal reminder in person or for a synchronous remote class. This could be via discussion post. If you want to make it about a larger issue in the course, it could be a weekly video. It could be a direct email to the student. So again, I think this is for you to decide how the academic incivility impacted the class at large. Is this something that the rest of the students need to have addressed publicly? Is that going to help them get back on the same page, or is it something that you can just address privately with the student? So that's for you to figure out in the moment. But I think this is an opportunity for you to articulate the consequences for future disruptions. If you need to, maybe you don't, maybe it's a one-time flare-up and it will never happen again. But I think sharing what will happen if this behavior continues is pretty important based on the hierarchy of the different types of academic incivility. So next is a private conversation with the student. So again, this could be Zoom, this could be after class, it could be in email, whatever makes the most sense for you and the particular student in the particular moment. But I think this is a really, although, you know, sometimes conflict doesn't feel good, I think this is a really important opportunity if you can take it to suss out if there's something going on outside of the student's life that is impacting their day-to-day learning experience. So what might be going on that might influence this behavior in their outside life? I think if you give students the opportunity to have an honest conversation, they're generally pretty open with sharing what might be happening, whether it's caregiving duties or job insecurity or any number of things. And I think while that knowledge may not necessarily change the outcome of the meeting, I think it gives you some additional insight. In particular, to think, is there a reasonable accommodation you might offer them to get back on track? And I don't necessarily mean reasonable accommodation in the sense of a DRC letter, which we will talk about shortly, but more so, is there some small either assistance, boost, extra attention, small points, extra credit, something that you can offer them with, again, that good faith step forward of how do you get back on track, both from a classroom setting, so maybe a points value setting, but also from an emotional setting. So how can you assure them that you have no hard feelings? It was a one-time thing, and how do you move forward in a positive direction together? So I think having a little bit of insight into what their outside class life is going on can be really helpful for figuring out if there is a reasonable accommodation that you might offer them. And I think, again, this is where you can articulate the impact of the behavior, both on you as an individual. I think students quite often forget that we're people and that we experience this. So I think sharing what you experienced in that moment can be really powerful sometimes. Again, I think that's for you to decide when it's useful or not. But I think also if you don't want to kind of seat yourself or your positionality in this moment, you can talk about how it impacts the classroom at large and how it disrupts the safety of a learning space. So I think you can very easily share either both perspectives or just focus on the classroom space. Excuse me for a moment. So I do want to take a moment and talk about grades again. So, and I'm sure all of us know this, but I do want to point out that a lower than expected grade is often a source of academic incivility. Again, undergrad, grad level, postgrad, it's just a sore spot for students. But I linked the U policy, which is that students have the right to request and receive an explanation for a grade during and after the course. That's one term after the course, not beyond it, but have no right to challenge the academic merits of any grade. Excuse me. So this means that you have no obligation to ever change a student's grade. If they earned the grade that they earned, that is the grade that they earned and the grade that should be entered into the system. So if a student reaches out to discuss their grade, absolutely have the conversation with them of why they earned those points, but that is the end of it. That is all you need to do as the instructor, and we are here to back you up. So this means that using robust grading rubrics can help keep this conversation short. I really encourage you, if you're not already using rubrics, it's a really helpful way to make it as transparent as possible to a student why they earned the grade that they earned. And even for 100% in-person courses, we strongly recommend that you use Canvas for accepting and grading assignments. This is both for documentation purposes, so you can easily plop in your rubric, select the points, and offer feedback that way. And that essentially stays in your course site. So if you have a student who pops up the following semester, again, within their time clock at the university, that they can still ask about a grade, you have the ability, or we have, if you're not teaching that term, to go in and offer explanation for the grade that they earned, as well as clarity. It is much easier. You don't have to worry about handwriting when you're using Canvas. So I think it's just a handy, quick way to speed up grading and make it more transparent for the student. So There will be times when you need to escalate, hopefully not very often, but when you do, please know that you have a number of people who are here to have your back to help you navigate those waters. So first, I recommend maintaining documentation, whether that's screenshots, emails, whatever communication you and the student have been having, just file it away and maybe, hopefully you will never need it. But having it is a very important thing to kind of expedite the process. And always use your @umn.edu email address for student communications. I say this because there is the very rare instance where you may need to pull any communications from a student for an office outside of our college. So you don't want to have to do that for your personal email or a work email outside of the U. So keep business to your @umn.edu email address. I'd also recommend considering the ambiguity of tone if you're using emojis or any sort of colloquial language. I think emojis can kind of diffuse things sometimes, but they also can be misconstrued. And I think that's the challenge with email in the first place. So part of that is I suggest keeping things as succinct as possible, especially if you get a more convoluted email chain from a student who keeps pushing on a particular thing. Having a succinct short email can be a really effective means of just diffusing any sort of emotion from that email chain. Because if you're just giving them a short response, a courteous short response, it can calm them down a little bit so you can have a more productive conversation. So next, connect with your director of graduate studies. Or your undergraduate, I believe it's the undergraduate director of undergraduate studies on the undergrad side of things. So you know this person, but they most likely know the student, may have had additional context about the situation, or may just have helpful guidance. So they're most likely teaching in the program as well, and either interacted with the student on an advisor sense or have worked with them as an instructor sense. So I think they're a really valuable resource for brainstorming and just finding positive solutions. I'd also like to offer myself as a contact. So again, it's Michelle Iwin, that's my email. So I am always happy to brainstorm. I'm always happy to just kind of throw some ideas at the wall and help you find a good solution. Usually I work with the director of graduate studies as well in those moments. But I am also a person who will potentially get involved if we need to issue any formal sanctions from the graduate program. So this could be perhaps GPA issues, this could be behavior issues, this could be going as far as discontinuation from the graduate program. So I'm that kind of person in the middle who can help you navigate that both informally and formally. So I'm always also happy to attend a group meeting with a student if you need either a third party, just to feel comfortable, or if you want me there in my official role, I can do that as well. I also at times issue formal letters. And again, that's those sanctions from the graduate program. So that's where I fit into this. And usually it's in concert with the director of graduate studies in most cases. So usually the three of us will kind of chat through issues and try and help you come up with solutions. And then next steps are consulting with the Office for Community Standards. They are very helpful in that you can informally consult with them. Just, I have an instance, do you have any ideas? Is this a violation? Is it not? This is also where you submit a formal report. So this can either be for something about academic misconduct, or if a student has plagiarized and you need to submit a formal plagiarism report. This is also where you can report violations of the student conduct code. So really important to Office. They have formal steps and processes for students. So they kind of walk the student through the sanctions and try and find positive outcomes when they can be positive, I should say it that way. As well as I want to point out Dr. Ritu Saxena is the Associate Dean for Graduate Education. So she's kind of the final stop for a student who is appealing a decision, wants to escalate a grade issue, wants to complain about a particular thing, either a course or the program. So everything kind of gets escalated on to her, and she's the final say on all of those issues. So if a student includes her, fantastic. That's part of your work done on just letting us know if something seems to be going awry. If not, she may get involved at a certain point. So just to share the players who may get involved when you need to escalate a situation. And realized I'm just coming to the end of my slide, but I need to talk a little bit faster, so I'll speed through this. So we have a little bit of time to talk. Two other campus offices that you might run into, and both can be really positive resources. So the Student Conflict Resolution Office is a set of neutral ombudspersons who work to find a reasonable solution for both student and faculty, or student in program, or student in college. So your student may reach out to them or threaten to reach out to them. That has happened a fair amount. Don't worry if they do. This is not a punishment. This is an office that truly is there to help find a positive solution and a positive compromise going forward. So your DGS or me, I am happy to join in any conversations with conflict resolution, because your DGSs, and I've worked with them for years, so we're kind of used to it. But they also have a number of DIY student success handouts on their website. So if ever a student says, I'm gonna talk to conflict resolution and it feels like a veiled threat, absolutely send them the link, because there are wonderful resources on their webpage that they actually might find of use. So they're a positive office. Don't view it as a negative. As well as the DRC, they work with students to develop and document reasonable accommodations for learning. So the DRC reps can clarify specific learning supports that are listed in accommodation letters. And I apologize, I'm just going to presume we all know what accommodation letters are. If not, please email me. I'm happy to elaborate further. Rarely your student might present an accommodation letter after the fact. So either after midterm and a grade that they didn't like, or after final grades. And that's very rare that that happens, but it does happen on occasion. So just note that accommodation letters are not retroactive. They are effective the moment that a student hands them to you moving forward. So if in doubt, talk to your DGS, talk to me. We're happy to review the situation with you and or bring in a DRC rep to help clarify it. I'm going to skip over these for the sake of a little bit of conversation time, but these are various resources that I encourage you to take a look at, including the student mental health resources for faculty. I think it's very useful. I am happy to talk with any of you, brainstorm, think through ideas, even if you just want to vent. I'm happy to be a resource and an ear for you as you navigate these waters. So if you have any questions, if you think of any additional resources that you would like to see around this issue or around other teaching issues, please feel free to email me. I absolutely value your feedback on it. Jen has linked in the evaluation form in the chat. So if you can please take a moment, I believe that's also in the Canvas page. So if you could fill that out, I would appreciate your feedback. All right, thank you, everybody.